Hello and welcome today to the American Pharmacists Association's Vaccine Confident Open Forum. It is so good to be with you as we talk about the latest COVID-19 vaccine updates. I'm Michael Hogue. I'll be your moderator for today's program. I'm Dean and Professor of Pharmacy at the Loma Linda University School of Pharmacy, and we're going to cover an awful lot of ground today. Our purpose today is to discuss the latest in COVID-19 vaccine recommendations, some practical strategies for expanding immunizations to children under 5, and how to manage questions that these patients may have about the COVID-19 vaccine options. Now, if you've been paying attention at all in the last week or so, there's been a lot of activity happening with the CDC and the FDA and new vaccines, and it can be a bit confusing because of all of the products that are now available on the market. But I'm happy today that we've got an expert panel that we're going to be working with. Today's program is actually sponsored and funded in part by a cooperative agreement with the CDC. And so we want to be sure we're giving them thanks and credit for this. The program was developed, however, by APHA. We have 3 outstanding panelists today. No strangers to any of you here. Dr. John Grabenstein serves as the Director for Scientific Communication with Immunize.org and is President of Vaccine Dynamics. He is a globally recognized expert in vaccines, in pharmacy and epidemiology. He was awarded the APHA Foundation 2020 Remington Honor Medal, which is in fact the profession's most distinguished and highest honor, and so we'll welcome him in just a moment. We also have with us Dr. Beverly Schaefer, co-owner of Caterman Sandpoint Pharmacy in Seattle, Washington. Beverly has been known for many, many years for innovation in community pharmacy practice. Her pharmacy is in an urban neighborhood and offers many pharmacy care services, including immunizations to kids of all ages. And that includes some of us adult kids too, I think Beverly would tell us. But today we'll focus on the children. She's a graduate of the University of Washington College of Pharmacy and also a clinical professor with the University of Washington School of Pharmacy. And last but not least is Mitch Rothholz, the Chief of Governance and State Affiliates with the American Pharmacists Association and Executive Director of the APHA Foundation. And Mitch has been engaged with immunization practice for the better part of the last 30 years, really leading APHA's immunization efforts from the staff perspective. So we want to first of all, point out that today we're going to offer some continuing education. So we have to do a few steps here that we wouldn't normally do during these webinars. These are the disclosures that our individual speakers and individuals involved in this program have. And we have 3 learning objectives for us today, and we'll cover all 3 of these objectives. And the goal here is to help you be more confident with these pediatric vaccines so that you can help your patients be more confident in their decision-making process. And ultimately, that's what we want. And so with that, let's move into some of our ground rules for our open forum. You'll notice in the GoToWebinar control panel a questions box. If you click on that questions box, a panel will come up that you can actually type in your questions. We'd like to encourage you to type in your questions at the moment that you have them. We'll take as many of your questions as we can during today's webinar. We'll ensure that your questions get answered to the greatest extent that we possibly can. So be sure to use that questions panel in order to do that. You'll also notice that APHA staff will communicate with you as an audience, and they'll send you messages out. You can pay attention to those. Notice that there is a handouts tab also. You can click on that tab and download the PDF copy of the slides that we're using for today's program. All the links in those slides will be active, so you can have those on your computer. And if you want to follow a link to a reference or to some other site where you might be able to get more information, feel free to do so, and we hope that'll be helpful to you. With that, I want to welcome our three panelists on screen with me. John, Beverly, and Mitch, would you turn your cameras on and join me here live in the program? And we'll begin moving through what is a lot of information, but I know the three of you can make it simple for our audience and can help us distill it down. John, I want to start with you. Over the last 18 months with COVID vaccine, pharmacists have done a lot. Can you quantify for us really the impact that pharmacists have made during the pandemic?
If the pharmacists watching feel like they've been busy, I can prove it. 255 million COVID-19 vaccinations by pharmacists and their teams in the last 18 months. If you take that and divide that by 593 million, which is the national total, that is 43% of all COVID-19 vaccinations by community pharmacists and their teams. But we all know that there's pharmacists in other settings, health systems, long-term care, et cetera. So my projection is that pharmacists, America's pharmacists, have given over half of all of the COVID-19 vaccinations in the last 18 months. A really remarkable contribution to the nation's health. So 8 million was in the first few months in long-term care as pharmacists went out to nursing homes, et cetera, to get the most vulnerable vaccinated. And there was a 2/3 drop in the death rate in those people. There was a page 1 New York Times graphic that looked like a waterfall from showing how fast pharmacists were able to save lives, very literally, and just a remarkable accomplishment. If you've got students in your work helping in your practice, they gave 1.3 million vaccinations in 2021. And then it's not just vaccinations, 45 something million specimens, COVID-19 specimens tested by pharmacists and teams, and at least 100,000 monoclonal antibody treatments. So just an incredible set of accomplishments.
Yeah, and I want to take an opportunity, John, with all the amazing things that you've quantified for us on a national basis. I wonder if any of our participants on the call today might have personal stories, if you do, about the successes in your local communities and through your pharmacies. Type into the question box, tell us briefly in a couple of sentences or so about the great successes that you've made locally in your communities, and we'd like to be able to recognize you and maybe your colleagues during today's webinar. So just type those into the questions box. Now, John, there has been a lot of new vaccine developments with COVID-19. If one thing is constant, it's change. It seems like there's always something coming. Last month, you briefed the audience, I guess, well, actually, it's been more than a month. It's been in March on the Novavax product that is impending to the marketplace. Can you tell us what's the latest with that particular vaccine, and what should pharmacists be doing in their practice to prepare for the Novavax product to arrive?
Right. So a few weeks ago, the Vaccines Advisory Committee to the FDA met in a public session and reviewed all the data that Novavax had submitted. The committee was unanimously satisfied that the vaccine is effective, and you can see there 90.4% effective against any infection, starting 7 days after the second dose, and satisfied with the safety of the product. I'll just give you a couple of highlights. This is a protein subunit vaccine, so that the dose you would inject contains the spike protein and an adjuvant. The adjuvant comes from the bark of a tree and some other excipients. It's grown in a cell system that's similar to Sanofi's Flublok recombinant flu vaccine, 2-dose regimen, as I mentioned. So the advisory committee was unanimously satisfied. The FDA has not yet granted the EUA, so the product is not yet shipping. And there's a third thing that the FDA checks for, and that's manufacturing quality and consistency. And so presumably that's all fine, and it's a matter of building up inventory or something more on the logistics side that is that we're waiting on before the vaccine's available to pharmacists. So not yet in the pipeline. I expect it's a matter of weeks or a very short number of months before it is. So it's another alternative. It's certainly a product that's being used in other countries, but the U.S. uses pretty big volumes, and so I suspect that might be an element of it here, but not quite yet. But almost. The lights are all green. We're just waiting for the final go ahead from FDA.
John, a question that I have for you that is based on the content of this slide. One of the things for those who've been paying a lot of attention to what's happening with the pediatric vaccines in particular, there was an awful lot of discussion about confidence intervals with data. I notice you've got the confidence interval here on vaccine efficacy with the Novavax vaccine. Could you just speak to that and why pharmacists need to care about confidence intervals?
Yeah, so with the big phase 3 pivotal trials for efficacy for Moderna, for BioNTech, Pfizer BioNTech, for Janssen, and indeed for Novavax as well, these are 30, 40,000 person trials, and they're sized so that there's relatively tight confidence intervals. The 83 to 95% you see there, or the 87 to 100% in the moderate to severe disease category, and it's a function of the size of the trials. I think, Michael, the issue you're bringing up is that with the pediatric data of the last couple of weeks, the trials were primarily designed to show comparable immune responses, comparable immunogenicity. They were not primarily powered for efficacy measures like this. That would have required much bigger trials, much longer period of time. And so they're, because they're smaller, the confidence intervals were wider. And so if that comes up in conversation, the primary judgment is that they're making antibody responses just as good. And those confidence intervals were tight. It's the efficacy data, because that wasn't the primary design of the trial.
Well, and you give me the perfect segue then into our next slide, which is to really talk about the COVID-19 vaccines and for children. So why should we even vaccinate? I mean, isn't it estimated that 70% of kids have had COVID? So why do we need to bother vaccinating them?
That one, and 99 point something percent of kids will do just fine if they get COVID. But the problem is if they're in that 1%, or if they're in that minuscule portion of a percent. And it's that kids can do very badly if they get infected. And it's not all that common, but it's devastating. And that's why you vaccinate, because COVID-19 in a child can be devastating. So just in the 6-month-old to 4-year age band, it's 2.5 million infections already, 20,000 hospitalizations, 200 deaths. Little kids get COVID-19 and can die. And the 5 to 11-year-old band, I think, was 600 deaths. So yes, they're rare, but a small percentage of millions and millions and millions of kids is hundreds of deaths, and that's that's the motivation. The concept, you can get this thing called MIS-C, multi-system inflammatory syndrome, and so those hundreds of deaths are more than we have with influenza each year, and we vaccinate kids there. So of course we have a tool that will protect them, and so we want to vaccinate them. So you Michael, you led with kids. Lots of kids have already been infected. Well, I'm going to give you my leaky raincoat analogy, which works with kids and with adults. Yes, an infection will protect you somewhat, a little bit, for a while. But what do you want to wear? Do you want to wear a leaky raincoat, meaning the protection that prior infection gives you? Oh, by the way, that leaky raincoat falls apart and falls off, and you get vulnerable again. And so it's prior infection. It's not like measles or yellow fever where a prior infection is really protective. That's not true for COVID-19. That prior infection only lasts a short period of time. You really want to get the vaccine for the best protection. And then that last, if I can go to that last bullet, you're going to hear parents say, all well and good, I want to wait and see. And that's fine. if the wait and see part is a week or two or a month, but when wait and see turns into months and months and months and months of delay, then they're leaving the child vulnerable to what can be a really devastating infection.
Well, you've given us great reasons for kids to get vaccinated. Let's now take a look at some of the FDA and CDC's decisions that have been made. I know pharmacists want to know, and this is a lot of information.
So the first thing is that the first version of this chart was much more complicated. And with the advice of several of you, I've simplified it. But it raises the point of it's getting so complicated, and there are so many facts and figures to memorize that we as human beings can make mistakes. So don't memorize. I'll teach with this slide, but we'll go through and show you ways to avoid errors and make sure you're doing the right things for your kids. Each of these rows in this table are now EUA authorized by the FDA and recommended by the CDC and or ACIP. And so you see the first three are the Pfizer BioNTech product and the age bands 12 to 17 years, 5 to 11 years, 6 months to 4 years. Two of them are 2-dose series. One is a 3-dose series, different dosages, same schedule more or less. But with the really little kids, there's no data yet on booster doses. But so that's a not yet. I wouldn't be at all. Don't tell parents it's only going to be 3 doses forever. There probably will be more doses if this follows patterns with the other products. Because the pipeline is full of product that was developed for some other use, some of the labeling isn't literally true anymore. And this is a careful thing with medication errors. We train our staffs to follow the labels, but we've got some labels we need to intentionally disregard. You're going to see some product that says give it only to 2 to 5 year olds or discard within 6 hours when it's really authorized for wider age ranges, or in one case the discard time is 12 hours, not 6 hours. So be alert to full sets of instructions, and obviously this is the primary set of kids, not immunocompromised kids. They should get extra doses. But as you're dealing, that's the exception to the rule. Make sure you're if you got an immunocompromised kid you're taking care of, get extra attention on what they need. Then the bottom 3 rows of the Moderna, slightly different age ranges. Notice it's 6 to 11 and 5 to 11, 6 months to 5 years, not 6 months to 4 years. All 3 are 2-dose series, but different dosages, same schedule, not yet on the boosters. There's an age range, not quite right. Passage with one of those products. Again, the immunocompromised get extra doses. We're going to show you some charts in coming slides. If you have both products, separate them or put them on different sides of the counter or the waiting room or whatever, however you're organized. Do physical things in extra trainings and posters with your staff to avoid errors.
Absolutely. And so I think in this one slide, the main takeaway is lots of details, have redundant systems for vaccine safety so that you can make sure that the right child is getting the right dose of the right product at the right interval. So very important. Let's go on to the next slide, John, because we've got a few resources I think that might be helpful.
Right. This is a poster from Pfizer BioNTech, and the URL is listed there. There are or will be 4 different container presentations, packaging presentations in the pipeline. Purple, gray, orange, and maroon. I won't go through all the details. Don't try to memorize it. But notice that some are diluted and some are not. The dilution amount differs. The volume you inject differs, etc. And so, I could say it all, but you wouldn't absorb it, and that's not the point. The point is to approach each patient one by one. And as you said it well, Michael, approach the parent and say, I'm about to give you, vaccine X, and your child is, remind me again, how old is your child? And engage the parent. Mike Cohen and the medication safety people have got a whole whole set of tips about how to approach and present and question. And I suspect Beverly will give us some of that too when we get to her portion.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely want to talk about the practical things that need to happen here. Let's go on to the next slide, because this was Pfizer's details, and I think we have Moderna's here.
Indeed. And so this is the corresponding one from Moderna. And again, 4 presentations. One of these isn't in the pipeline yet, but will be soon. Notice that 3 have blue caps. One has a red cap, but then look at the paper label, the bands in magenta or hot pink, as my boss likes to call it. A teal or whatever. Whatever. And if some of you are colorblind, so don't rely just on colors. Read the words and the numbers, and take it slow. Customize what you're doing for each person. Don't turn it off autopilot, and make sure you're doing the right thing for the kids in front of you.
And I think there may be one more resource we have available, if I'm not mistaken.
We have 3 set. The next 3 slides are resources available. These are the ones from APHA. There are some additional charts, and some of these screen grabs are not the most recent, because APHA staff has been scurrying to update with the new recommendations as well. But there's the one with all the rectangles is all sorts of training modules and materials that APHA is offering. And then the one that's in the foreground with the lady with the red mask is the Vaccine Confident website, the microsite, that has all sorts of communication tips about how to prepare yourself and your staff, how to understand where your patients are coming from, and then how to prepare your conversation, your dialogue, your communications with your patients. Let's go to the next one, which is a bunch of CDC resources, algorithms. The one on the far left is a really important one, the use of COVID vaccines in the United States. But look at those 3 little words: interim clinical considerations. It's a huge amount of detail. And if you talk with people, the interim clinical considerations is where it's at for the fine detail of the left-handed kidney transplant patient who just went over the international date line and all that, that kind of stuff. And lots of good things.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's for sure. Lots of details. And I think we have one more slide.
Yep. And
not
then I'll
mistaken.
get out of the way. There is. These are the things from immunize.org. And I want to point out the one on the right side, which is the checklist. And it will be revised at their website, our website, in about an hour with all the new things. But it's the dates of the versions of the fact sheets and the dates of the various CDC documents and that sort of thing. And so things are changing so fast. I recommend that for your own quality control purposes in your practice, you appoint somebody once a month, every month at least, to go through and make sure you've got the right versions of the fact sheets and the right versions of the color charts and right versions of the dosing and the most recent updates to the interim clinical considerations and all that. It's a good quality control checklist to make sure you're up to date.
Thanks for all of that, John. Now, Mitch, let's talk about pharmacists and involvement of pharmacists in pediatric immunizations. I mean, but not every pharmacist is probably going to want to give pediatric vaccines, but some will. What has APHA learned about what pharmacists are interested in doing relative to pediatric immunizations?
Michael, we've been doing what we call pulse surveys to do a sample of responses from pharmacy community to see what their thinking is, where they are heading, and what things do we need to help to support their efforts. And so we did one before ACIP did its decisions in terms of looking at what pharmacists are willing to do in regards to childhood vaccinations. And over half of the respondents to the survey said that they were willing and ready to administer vaccine to children 3 years and above. And then we, as you go, from 5 years, you have more practitioners who are willing to do it. Then as you go further down in age, the percentages went down a little. But overall, pharmacists felt like they were prepared. They also responded. Over half of them were we're ready to serve those populations. But the other thing we've done in this survey too, in some comments that came back, is that we are using it to educate decision makers as they're preparing for the recent decisions. And what we are articulating to those decision makers and to practitioners and their teams is that there needs to be a conversation between the pharmacy teams and their management in terms of what are going to be the age groups that they're comfortable administering, because we don't want any pharmacist or pharmacy team member, just like we don't want any physician or nurse or anybody else in the healthcare system doing something they're not comfortable with, and to communicate that to the public so that they are aware of what vaccines those practices are willing to administer.
And Mitch, just kind of following up on that concept, if a pharmacist that's listening today has decided, you know, I'm just not comfortable giving vaccines to someone under 5 years of age, what do you recommend that they do if a parent comes in and wants the vaccine? Should they just turn the parent away entirely, or should they make a referral? What do you recommend in that circumstance?
Great question, Michael. And what we've been recommending to folks is because the public has become, as John said, over 50% of the COVID vaccines have been done in pharmacies. People have become accustomed to going to the pharmacy to either get vaccinated or ask questions. And so at a minimum, if you're not going to do the vaccine in your practice for 5 years and under, know who in your community is doing it so you can refer them to those practitioners and help them gain access to those vaccines. And in a lot of communities, those who aren't actually administering are reaching out to their pediatricians and family physicians, public health, and other pharmacies in their community to see how they can help. So if there's a clinic that's going to be done in your community, partner with those providers. You may not be the one who administers it, but you could help support them through the process.
And Mitch, on a federal level, I'm talking about the federal PrEP Act authorities granted by the Department of Health and Human Services. Pharmacists can only vaccinate children over the age of 3. But in some states, my understanding is that they can actually vaccinate younger children. Can you remind us the difference between the federal authority and the state authorities and what we need to be thinking about as it relates to that?
So currently, Michael, the PrEP Act authorizes across the whole country. So basically overrides state barriers to authority. And so it's 3 years and above for COVID vaccine as well as for childhood vaccine. So where there are before COVID, there were specific limitations on the ages that pharmacists and technicians and student interns could administer to. What the PrEP Act, it basically makes it consistent across the whole country, that authorizes pharmacists and pharmacy team members to administer those vaccines to ages 3 years and above. Now, in states that had that authority younger than 3, those are still in place. And so that gives a little more expansion of that authority. And so the one thing, if you're doing children, that is in the PrEP Act, is that you need to also remind those parents or caregivers about the importance of well child visits, so that we're not trying to disrupt care of those children, but we're trying to complement and increase access and make sure that people get vaccinated that need to get vaccinated.
That's great. Now, Beverly, you're a community pharmacist in suburban, urban area, I guess urban area really. How do you, in fact, work with pediatricians in your community? Because I think there's been a little bit of nervous energy, to say the least, about pharmacists vaccinating pediatric patients. But you do this all the time. So how have you worked with pediatricians?
So we do it all the time, and we do babies. We're fearless. We go to all ages, literally. But I have a strong belief that every child needs a medical home. So we typically do not do routine childhood immunizations. They need to see a doctor for that. So we don't go into that area at all. But anything special, travel immunizations, flu shots, or COVID, I think to help that staff of that pediatrician office, they are so happy to have additional resources to be able to refer people to ease up on their staff, to get people done quickly. They love having an additional resource.
Yeah, I know that I know that parents are anxious to get good information. There's so much misinformation that floats out there about vaccines, and so I know that's definitely an issue. Beverly, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your practice? You've got such a unique practice, and you're so involved in so many different things. Give us an overview of your practice.
So it's ours is literally a neighborhood community pharmacy, and I tell people you've never been to my store, but you know exactly what my store is because this is where you spent your allowance as a kid. This is where kids come to spend their allowance. Everybody can remember where they spent their first allowance. That's Caterman's. It's got a warm feel to it, and you know we're there to serve people and serve people's health needs that maybe aren't met by other entities. So immunizations was a perfect little niche, and we do a ton of travel shots. We do more than 15,000 immunizations every single day. Right now, we're doing so many travel shots that we've, you know, brought on extra staff and everything else. So it really is a niche that once people can find you and know that you can do the whole family, it's a wonderful resource for the entire community. And these photos, I'm just using this for an example, but one of the things that we did, we created a special area for high volume immunizations. And so we ordered these purple walls. It's a folding panel. It's 11 panel folding panel, and we moved out the DME is what we did. And we created this little area where you come in and you don't even go back to the pharmacy. That's kind of a dead end area. And when you're doing a lot of immunizations, you need to move people through quickly so that you can you know, keep traffic flowing and achieve the maximum amount of immunizations that you can. So I'm just using these photos to show that we have, you know, a specific place where people come to check in. We do all of these by appointment, so we've got all of their paperwork done ahead of time. They come in, they check in. We have two little units set up behind these purple walls so that we can have two pharmacists at a time. I want you to note the sucker tray there. That was our COVID sucker bowl. Everybody could just pick the one that they wanted. And I can tell you when you're doing kids, they've got their eye on that sucker board from the time they get there. So, you know, that's a pretty important part of the process. But to have a circular flow is really critical because a lot of these little kids come in strollers, and you know how big those modern baby strollers are. So this is just part of things to think about as you get ready to do pediatric immunizations.
Yeah, Beverly, let me just ask about a tip. You know, adults are anxious about vaccines as well, but what do you do to calm down children to make sure that they're not just completely crying and so forth before you give the vaccine? How do you keep the children calm? You got any tricks or secrets and so forth that you could share?
So part of it is having a space that you can move the people that are reluctant immunizees away from the line, because I can tell you one crying kid will set the whole line on fire. So you know that you've got to have some space that you can move these kids to, and this again is part of, you know, how you're going to strategize, how you're going to do this. But one of the things that we do is we talk to them, and if they're not too unglued by the time they get to the pharmacist, you know, you can talk to them. I like to ask the kids about what sports they like to do. I like to ask them what grade they're in. I like to ask them, you know, what their favorite color is. It's something that I always talk right to the child, and it's something that I try to make a connection. And the other thing that you've got to remember when you're doing kids, you're really doing both the parent and the child, and so you need to make you know, good connection with the parent too. Some of them are as anxious as the children are. And so you need to have, you know, a strategy for telling the parent how they can help you. And I always say, okay, you know, mom, sit down and put so-and-so on your lap. And a lot of times they think that they're going to put the child in the chair. And I can tell you, any 4-year-old that sees somebody coming at them with a sharp object, you know, has the right reaction. They're going to run. And so you want to have the parent to sit and hold the child. And you know, sometimes we can negotiate a little bit while they're in the chair. We know they're going to get the shot, but you know, do you want it in your arm or in your leg? And sometimes they have to think about that decision, and that's okay, because then it takes their mind off of exactly what's going to happen next. So, you know, do you want it in the arm? Do you want it in the leg? And sometimes that's a nice offering for them. And you know, I sort of cringe when I hear parents say, it won't hurt, it won't hurt. Yes, it will. Just tell them it's going to be quick, for heaven's sake. So don't lie to the kid. That's a terrible way to start off. And then I tell the parent, okay, you're going to hold the child's hands, and they barely touch the hand, or and no, you're going to really hold their hands. And so once we get them seated and they're ready to go, then be quick about the process. You're ready to go, and don't be messing around here. Don't take half an hour to peel the Band-Aid, get the dose ready. Everything needs to be ready when you're ready to go. So have your Band-Aids ready, have the dose drawn up, have everything handy right there, and then quick poke, Band-Aid. And often there are a few tears, and sometimes you need to allow for this time to comfort the child afterward. One of my biggest problems is what happens when the mom comes with more than one child. Oh my gosh, that's a terrible dilemma, because the first one's going to let the others know exactly how this is going to go. And so I would tell you, if the mom comes with more than one child, do the older one first, and do the younger one second, but do the older one first. Next slide, please. And so the other trick is just exactly as I'm getting ready to poke them with the needle, I'll ask them a question. Oh my gosh, this is a huge muscle. What kind of sports do you do? And even little kids, gosh, 3-year-olds do gymnastics, they've got opinions about sports. And so I try to ask them a question right then, poke them, boom, Band-Aid, done. And so the parents are kind of impressed that it's kind of a quick process. If the child is going to cry, they're kind of surprised about it because they aren't expecting it to be a quick process. So it usually eliminates and settles down some of that after problems too. But if someone is physically struggling and having a hard time getting themselves into the booth, I ask them to step aside and let us do someone else. And so you need to have a little area that you can have them step aside. The parents often have a lot of questions and concerns at this point, and so I want to address those concerns, but sometimes you can do that afterward. And get some volunteers to help you. People love helping in these immunization clinics that we have. This is something that we have closed our stores since COVID on Sunday. And so a lot of times if we want to do a lot of kids, we have them on Sundays, and we have volunteers, we have volunteer immunizers, we have volunteer doorkeepers, we have volunteer soothers, we have volunteer people that pass out the COVID cards and the suckers and the lollipops. But volunteers are really helpful, and people love volunteering. Get a couple of moms, man, oh man, they can move that line through. They can help the parents and the kids. And so it's something that your entire community loves being involved with, keeping people healthy. And
That's a great point. Yeah.
the other thing that I'm just going to say is that you have control of this process. Maybe you don't want to stock every vaccine and every formulation available. Maybe you want to just choose one brand and stick with that, so that you don't have any confusion about dosing and that kind of thing. In our pharmacy, we only give one kind of vaccine. On any day that we're giving vaccine, we only give one kind of vaccine. We do the pediatric vaccine on one day, we do the adult vaccine on another day, we do the teenage vaccine on another day. And with pediatrics under 5, we're going to be doing that on one day. And like I say, initially we may do a big group event. In the fall, we did 500 kids on a Sunday. We had 3 different stations set up and just rolled them through all day long. And everybody came at 10-minute intervals and were gone in about 20 minutes. And they're pretty amazed that we can be as efficient in a pharmacy as that. So pharmacists, really rock doing pediatric vaccinations.
So, Beverly, I not to embarrass you in any way, but if my memory serves me correctly, you are one of the, if not the first pharmacist who immunized a patient from a pharmacy in the United States. You were right up there at the beginning, I know, very early on. Can you tell everybody what year it was when you first began giving immunizations?
1996, we were the first pharmacy that offered mass immunizations by a pharmacist. And the big eye opener was the first year we were hoping to do 300 doses. We didn't know what we were doing. We went out and we got trained and we're ready to go. And we were hoping we could do 300 doses in the month of October. So 10 a day. We thought, oh, we could do 10 a day, I think. And we ended up doing 1,200 the first month that we did flu shots because people loved the convenience of coming to the pharmacy. And I can tell you, after that success in the first year that we did that, there's no looking back. I mean, pharmacists access, pharmacist services, pharmacist care, meeting an unfulfilled health need. That's exactly what COVID has opened up for a lot of pharmacies, is to move on to, providing more patient care services that are needed in the community.
Yeah, that's great. One question has come in from our audience. Bev, could you talk about your pharmacy computer system? I'm assuming that your computer system is automated to dump immunization data into your state's registry, and that you can access state registry information. The question was about what system do you use, pharmacy computer system do you use, and do you think it matters which system you use?
I think it's definitely required to have these immunizations automatically reported to the state registry. We used to do these by hand. It took hours and hours and hours. We use RX30 as the computer system that we use, and it automatically reports to the state immunization registry. And we couldn't possibly do what we're doing without that factor.
Absolutely. John, I have a clinical question for you that's come in from our audience. Regarding the Moderna and Pfizer pediatric vaccines, was there any difference in either the efficacy of the two pediatric products, and we're talking about a lot of different age groups that it was studied in, and any difference in the adverse event profile between the Moderna product and the Pfizer product that we need to be aware of?
Sorry. There were some minor differences. I didn't memorize which one was which because the numbers were slightly different, but not enough to drive a product choice. Not just in my opinion, but CDC didn't have any brand preference, and the efficacy numbers or the immunogenicity numbers were a little different also. So it's sort of like back in the old days of which was the better one for the adults. The numbers are a little different, but nothing programmatically that would make you want to drive one over another.
Yeah, and I would also just remind our audience that the CDC evaluated these pediatric vaccines during a ACIP meeting that was held in public online on the 17th of this month. You can actually go to cdc.org/vaccines and then click on the link to the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. And you can hear the clinical data presentations that were given by CDC officials as well as by the manufacturers. And what you will see is that the number of adverse events that occur in both populations, regardless of the study age, the number of adverse events that were serious were very, very small. And in fact, the incidence of myocarditis in the tiniest of babies, 6 months to 5-year-old, the incidence for one of the two vaccines was 0. There were no cases of myocarditis. And so I do think that it's important for pharmacists who are really interested in solving this. We don't have time to get into the nitty-gritty today, but go back and listen to the June 16th open discussions that happened, June 17th open discussions that happened with those vaccines. Very important. Now, I'm going to take a few other questions here. I also want to talk about, Mitch, maybe you can talk about some legal issues here with the PrEP Act and authorities. Do pharmacists have an obligation to provide a service if they know that a patient needs the service? So in other words, is it acceptable for a pharmacist to just simply say, we don't provide vaccines here at this practice, or we don't provide pediatric vaccines? Or is there some obligation legally that pharmacists must prefer You talked a little bit about referral for well child visits. Can you maybe split the hairs here and tell us, so does a pharmacist have an obligation to do something legally or morally? And then what are we required to do legally?
Okay, well, let me first start out. I am not an attorney, and I will not be playing an attorney on this call. So I'll give my opinion on this. The only thing legally that's required, I mean, with the PrEP Act, you have to, if you're doing children from 3 to 18, you need to provide information about the importance of a well child visit. And we've got some templates that providers could use to share with the caregiver in that situation. Other services, just like physicians don't have to provide every service that they're authorized to do, or other healthcare practitioners, it's up to us as professionals to serve the needs of patients. And that also means that if we don't provide that service, refer them to somebody who can provide that service if we know that information, or refer them, in this case, to public health department. If you or nobody else in your community is doing it, that's another place to serve. So it's more of a professional responsibility to make sure. Our goal here is to make sure that individuals in the community are protected. And it doesn't matter who's given the vaccine, for example, it's that they get vaccinated, and it gets, as Beverly talked about, gets recorded into the IIS system. So I think we have a professional responsibility. But in terms of what we legally have to do, we're legally, in this case, the PrEP Act, we have to give them information about well child visits, as well as provide information that we have.
Okay, so Beverly and John, either of you can answer this question. Could you talk about the administration site for vaccines in kids? Deltoid or vastus lateralis? Which is the correct place to give the immunization, and what is your guide? Beverly, we'll let you start.
Okay, so typically if they are probably less than about 2 years old, I typically do use the thigh. But older than 2, I give them their choice if they want their choice, and older than 4, they definitely want in their arm. They don't want to take their pants down. So there's a little bit of modesty at that age. And the other thing I get questioned about is needle length. We use a 1-inch needle on everybody, and this needs to be an IM injection. And those cute little thighs, of course, they need a 1-inch needle. And the deltoids, this is another thing that's a pharmacist can eyeball pretty much. Is this some deltoid, or should we do it in the thigh? So either one, and it's something that I sort of eyeball as they come in and sit down. How chubby is this little kid? So, and if they've got an opinion one way or the other. So we go either way.
Okay, John, do you have any guidance you'd like to give?
I bow to the voice of experience. I was talking to a bunch of student pharmacists last night, and I made the comment that only after you go through this training do you suddenly realize the vast variety of anatomy out there, of big and little, and dark and light, and all the variety God put on the earth. And but I think Beverly's got it.
Yeah, and I would also say I've heard some general comments made at the national level that, oh, well, pharmacy schools don't train kids how to give shots in the vastus lateralis. And I as the dean of a pharmacy school, I just want to tell you that that's not true. We actually do at our university teach our students now to give immunizations in the vastus lateralis, because we know that pharmacists may be in situations where they're called upon to immunize pediatric patients. So we do train our pharmacists to do that. So I think one of the comments that was made in chat earlier was pharmacists who may not choose to engage in this activity, we do need to be cautious to not make generalizations about the profession, because there may well be a pharmacist down the street from you who's extremely experienced, like Bev, and are very willing to give these vaccinations. And if you can refer patients to another pharmacist for immunization, that's wonderful. That's supportive of the profession. So I think that's important.
Or
Yeah,
if you'd like to come to my store and observe, you know, if you're not confident enough to do it on yourself, just come and see how we do it. And that often is enough to help you figure it out. But we've had many pharmacists that just want to come and observe how we do it. So that's
Beverly
another.
will give you
Yeah,
a lollipop if you do.
if I could, we all take lollipops. If I could also add to what Beverly just said too, is either go to another pharmacy who's doing it, another healthcare practitioner who works with pediatric kids, your public health department are all sources to go and watch. But also APHA has a specific training program on pediatric vaccinations that actually go through and review the process for administering to children in the different locations. So there are resources out there, both from APHA, CDC, IAC, and other groups that you could refresh yourself on.
Mitch, I want to ask you one last question here. The PrEP Act, I believe, is scheduled to expire on or about July the 15th. I think that's correct. Is it going to be extended or?
It actually is not scheduled to expire. Actually, it's supposed to be good until 2024, unless the Secretary of HHS ends it earlier. There are different aspects of a public health emergency that have different dates of expiration. Some deal with the states, some deal with other federal parts, but the actual PrEP Act is supposed to be good until 2024, unless the Secretary ends it early.
The act is permanent. That's law. It's the declarations
Right,
under the act.
amendment.
And I have played lawyers from time to time.
Thanks for helping me clarify that. That's you're absolutely right. The act is there. It's the use of the act in the emergency. It's good till 2024 right now.
Yeah, that's right. Very, very, very important, and that's a good point. Let me ask, since we've got just a couple minutes, I want to ask.
I have a question that I want to ask John when you're done, Mitch.
Sure. Beverly, could you tell us, do you involve pharmacy technicians in your practice at all, and to what extent?
So we don't involve them in actual immunizing, but everything up to the actual needle poke, they are involved in. They're in data entry, they're in, you know, insurance transmission, they're in record keeping, they are in vaccine preparation, everything right up to the actual immunizing. We do involve techs.
Okay. And Mitch, if or John, either one of you, if a pharmacist has a patient who has some sort of adverse event that occurs either right away or maybe a few days later, can you remind pharmacists how they're supposed to report those? John?
So yeah, VAERS, VAERS, VAERS.HHS, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System is the way to do it. Better for you to do it because you're more likely to get more clinical details into the report than the parent. The parent can report it themselves if there's any trust issues, or they just they've got fears of things being swept under the rug. Invite them to report themselves. The other thing is vSafe, the smartphone-based app. I've gotten notices. I used the app after I got vaccinated myself, a year ago, and it reminded me the other day that if I have any small children, that I'm welcome to register them as well. So those are two good systems.
And
Very important.
just to also, Michael, to add on to the vSafe, which is really important, especially with this age population, because we're tracking any effects. If it's a child under 13, unless they've changed it recently, it gets reported under the parent for the vSafe program.
That's great.
There's a way of indicating.
Yeah, Beverly and John, thank you both for joining us, and I'll cover a few things for everyone. Let's first of all talk about, just real quickly, some of APHA's ongoing activities, some things that you might want to know or need to know. We'll go on to the next slide. First of all, let me remind you all that we're still attempting to secure federal provider status through the U.S. Congress. A new bill called the Equitable Community Access to Pharmacist Services Act is H.R. 7213, we need you to reach out and to ask your member of Congress to sign on to this bill, which would allow pharmacists to be providers under Medicare Part B for testing, treating, immunizing, and for certain pharmacist services whenever public health emergencies happen, or when there's a need to close a gap in health equity. And we really need every pharmacist to come on board and to take action. And we've provided you with the link here to be able to go take care of that and to log in and to take action through APHA's website. Next slide, please. Now, in case you miss it, APHA has a Pulse on Practice and Policy Open Forum series that is moderated by the APHA president. The next one is coming up on Thursday, July the 14th from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We'd encourage you to register for that and to learn about what's going on with legislation and regulatory practice across the country and how you can get more involved. It's a great way to stay up to date and plugged into the profession. The next slide. And also, as this webinar was focused on vaccine confidence and helping you be more confident with pediatric immunizations, I would just tell you that APHA has an entire web page and website devoted to vaccine confidence at vaccineconfident.pharmacist.com, with a plethora of resources available for you, things that you can use as job aids in your pharmacy, things that you can use to help educate your patients, just different techniques and suggestions for different ways that you can move forward in your practice in building vaccine confidence among your pharmacy team and among the members of your community. So we want you to take advantage of all of those things. And we're going to announce the attendance code. So for those of you who need to get a pen and paper ready, I'm going to give you a few seconds to do it. Just be prepared to record the code when it's available. We only offer CE for this program if you participated live and in person today. For those of you who are joining this webinar late or asynchronously, we're sorry, but the CE is not available unless you were on live. In order to obtain CE credit, you're going to go to your My Training page on the APHA website. You log in with your pharmacist.com username and password. You'll click on this forum, which you pre-registered for before you got here, enter the attendance code and complete the evaluation. You have got just a little bit over a month to be able to get that in by August the 27th.